This is Ahval Online, meeting point of accurate news and free comment on the current affairs of Turkey. Welcome to our podcast series.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of Anatolian Dispatch, part of the podcast family of Ahval News, your best source of information for all things Turkish and what's going on in Turkey. Today we have with us again Colonel Chris Kilford. Dr. Kilford has a PhD in history and was a defense attaché to Turkey and accredited to many of the neighboring countries. According to the polling that we do and the information we get, he's one of our most popular guests on our podcast. So we're very glad to have him here today. Chris, how are you doing?
Hello, Ed, and hello, everybody. I'm glad to be here. And you're absolutely right. I was the defense attaché in Turkey up until 2014. I looked after Georgia, relations with Georgia and Turkmenistan and Azerbaijan as well. But prior to that, I was also the deputy defense attaché at our embassy in Kabul from July 2009 to July 2010. So I spent a year in Kabul, and so you can imagine I've been watching events there and in the region quite closely.
So let's talk about recent events in Afghanistan. Canada, of course, had over the years a number of soldiers who served there. I'm not sure of the exact number, but so a pretty long-standing commitment for a number of years there. And you have that personal experience of having been there, having been the assistant defense attaché. And then, of course, the Turkey experience. I mean, my biggest question really is, so what does all this mean in a sense for Turkey, its relationship with Afghanistan, but also its relationship with NATO, and then, of course, with the United States? I mean, how is this recent events in Afghanistan going to impact all of that?
Yeah, it's really hard to know where to start. I've been doing some commentary up here for CBC Radio and a few others, and you never really know where to start because there's so much to unpack. First of all, from the Canadian perspective, we were one of the first to go in late 2001, and we had military folks there right up until 2014. We had at times, 3,000 or more troops down in the Kandahar area, especially at the latter stages. We then moved to a training mission in 2011 to 2014. We lost 158 soldiers there. It's quite a significant number. And I know that all of them, everyone that served there from the Canadian side and the civilians, of course, that were there, it's been difficult. It's been really hard to watch what has happened, and all of that good work, we think a lot of it has been lost, but we'll see. Hopefully that won't be the case going forward. When I actually look at the situation there and how quickly it unfolded and what's just happened with the withdrawal of folks from the with the US and others from the region, it hurts. I mean, it really does. I mentioned, I think to you earlier, that it's like ripping off a Band-Aid, and maybe in a month or 2 months, we'll look back and maybe say, okay, well, actually it wasn't that bad, that we, the fact that we got out the way we did. There'll be a lot of lessons learned and discussions around this, but is it the right thing? That again, it's very hard to say. There's a side of folks that will say we've abandoned the Afghans, and that is true. But then there's another side that says that no matter what we would have had done there over another decade or two, it wouldn't have been enough. I think the difficult thing for people to realize is how tough it was in Afghanistan, because you were starting out with some pretty raw material in terms of people, good people, but never having had people pay close attention to them in a good way to help them. We went through the whole period where we funded the Mujahideen to fight the Soviets in Afghanistan, 15,000 dead Soviet soldiers, 46,000 wounded. Over 1 million Afghans dead. Nobody cared about the Afghans in the West during that period. We just wanted to defeat the Soviets. And then we move in and try then to initially, of course, get rid of Osama bin Laden and the Taliban, but then move into this nation building phase. And I don't think people realized how difficult it was going to actually be. The illiteracy levels and so forth, the divisions within Afghanistan itself, and everybody got to work, but in the end, it didn't work. And I think it's fair to say that, you know, if you had given yourself more time, that it would have been different, because I don't think we really got serious about nation building, if you like, until around 2008 to 2010. We know that when the Taliban left power, there were around 20 million Afghans. And today there's almost 40 million Afghans. So while we were there, 20 million more Afghan people were born, right, and they're all very young. And so we were, you know, dealing with that part of it too. And so you need to spend time. This is not an in and out sort of thing. It's like many of the conflicts in the region. This is an investment that's 50 to 100 years at least. And if you're not prepared to make it, then you get what I just said, this pulling off the Band-Aid, because it's all become right, way too much.
I mean, many commentators here have, you know, decrying the decision to leave, have commented that, well, how long did it take us to change Nazi Germany into a functioning democratic West Germany? And then subsequently, it evolved into its own, you know, once after unification with the East. And then, you know, the Germans will even tell you how difficult it has been to get the Ostis, the East Germans, integrated into a united Germany. You know, and they'll also talk about the fact that we still have about 28,000 troops in South Korea. And nobody believes that South Korea in the 1950s was anything approximating a democracy. It literally took decades, as you're saying. And unfortunately, the question is, you know, is there that amount of patience in the West? There might be in certain situations, but apparently not for Afghanistan. But it is now what it is, and we'll have to see if the Taliban, who are 20 years different, just as the country has changed in 20 years, one expects that the Taliban, either better or worse, have changed in 20 years.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, this was a Taliban 20 years ago that banned televisions, banned the internet, knocked down statues. And here we find ourselves with the Taliban leadership with Twitter accounts, with hundreds of thousands of followers on WhatsApp as well. Everybody, if you look at all the pictures of the Taliban that you can see, they're all carrying cell phones and taking selfies. So they are no longer technophobes. That's certainly one thing that's changed. What's also surprising to me, of course, we saw photographs coming out of Kabul in the last couple of days with one of their crack units looking like they've been trained by the Americans, trained, dressed, and maybe they were, for all we know. But the mimicry, quite interestingly, the mimicry of the United States is right. Look and feel for troops. So they were, you would have expected as Taliban members that they would have just been dressed in traditional garb, but no, there they were looking like US troops, and arguably better dressed than any Afghan soldier that I actually saw when I was there or afterwards. It's quite interesting to see this mimicry taking place. Anyway, this is a country now that will have to pull itself together, find some degree of recognition, because they need help. Yeah. Obviously, I mean, people know this. All the money that flowed in there was actually keeping things alive. And the Taliban, and I've said this to groups up here in Canada, the only people that were more surprised about what's happened in Afghanistan than us was them. They're completely taken with this. Yes, they had shadow governments and shadow this and that, but that's a big difference from being in opposition now to actually being in charge and not having any of the resources that the folks who were there before had. So you've gone from conspiring in coffee shops, if you like, to now being in charge of municipal services in Kabul. And if you don't get it right, all of these young Afghans, they've all grown up. Even the Taliban benefited from the US presence there. Yes, it gave them a focus point for their own ideology and drive to get people out. But Taliban members also went to ATM machines, also gassed up their cars, bought food, all done by the guarantee of the US being there, creating security and having the supply chains work. So now they can't gas up and they can't buy stuff and they can't go to an ATM. So they also have an expectation of the services being the same moving forward as Afghans who are on the other side will. So you're going to have a lot of upset young people if they don't have access to the internet, ATMs, and all that other good stuff, regardless of their ideology, of what side they sit on. The leadership has to, the Taliban leadership, I would imagine, despite all of the bravado, is desperately seeking allies to keep this country just up and running on a day-to-day basis right now. Yeah, and they're there. Those allies are there. The people will come. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, people were aghast when the Taliban said that, they were going to let all foreign citizens leave, but they weren't going to let any Afghans leave. And people were like, well, what's going to happen to these people? Well, the short answer is it depends who takes them, who takes control of their ministry or the business they're in, because clearly what that was a sign that at least some of the Taliban, if not all of them, realize they need the skilled people to stick around. Now, the skilled people, where many of them were, of course, working in concert with the US and NATO, so many of them are fearful of the retribution they might face. And then, of course, you have that, I would say you might get a division within the Taliban, right? Because you'll have the Taliban who recognize they have to accommodate the generation of the last 20 years who wants Wi-Fi and ATMs and internet access and all that, and also, by the way, know how to run things, know how to keep the ATM machine running, know how to keep the gas pumps working, know how to fix the electric grid, et cetera, et cetera. But, let's be honest, there are some very extreme elements within the Taliban. It's not a monolith. And that's going to create some interesting frictions. We'll see how they put out. But I wanted to pass over to, you mentioned recognition. They're going to be seeking recognition. Where do you think the relationship with Turkey and Afghanistan is headed?
Yeah, well, first of all, Turkey's had a long relationship with Afghanistan on the humanitarian side, the cultural side, on the military assistance side. Afghanistan, I think, was the first or second country to recognize the new Turkish Republic, the first to have an embassy in Ankara in sort of 1923. And you saw Turkish military personnel heading to Afghanistan during that period as well, so to train the Afghan military and police. So this is a very long relationship. It's survived even during the dark days of the Soviet occupation, and even when the Taliban were there. I mean, Turkey, I would say, knows Afghanistan really well. And also you saw that more recently with the fact that they were contributing troops to ISAF, up to 1,500 at one point, in command of 8,000 foreign troops at another point. And Turkish businesses also moved in, and they had two provincial reconstruction teams, civilian-led provincial reconstruction teams. And so there's been investment there as well. So now that we've moved into this new phase, and I know Turkey tried very hard to play all of that I've just mentioned, to keep itself at the airport. It was difficult to get rid of this NATO tie-in, of course.
Right.
It was something that if they had not been a member of NATO, then I suspect they would have been allowed to stay, but that's speculation on my part. But the fact that they were NATO members meant that they had to go. So now the question is, what happens next? And of course, who do we see arrive in the region? Qatar this morning with a plane load of technicians to see about getting the airport running up. And I'm sure everybody listening in knows that relationship between Doha and Ankara is very close. It was close. It became closer with the blockade by Saudi Arabia in 2017 and the establishment of a Turkish base in Qatar. So now we see the possibility for Turkey to reinsert itself into Afghanistan, and also because of the relationship that they have with Pakistan. So we have a triangle developing between Turkey, Pakistan, and Qatar, each potentially now working together to reinsert themselves and assist the Taliban, not because they've changed sides, if you like, but this is a wider issue of supporting Afghan people as a start. And Turkey knows fully well that an unstable Afghanistan is not only an unstable region, but it means more refugees flowing towards their border. And, if you've been watching Turkish television, you see now quite a bit a focus on the wall, on the Iranian border. Turkish troops are patrolling. I mean, Turkey has enough refugees as it is, including Afghans. And to have more and more and more really begins to then create instability inside Turkey, because there has been a turn in public opinion against the refugee presence. So for Turkey, Turkey has a lot of cards to play. It has the historical card to play, cultural card to play. Religion, of course, is a factor, their knowledge of the country, but then the closeness that they have with Pakistan, and the cooperation that the folks in Doha have been able to achieve by having the Taliban located there. So, it's always too early to say, because it's only been a few days since the Americans left, or a day or so. We need to give this a little bit more time to see how it would play out. But the one thing I think Turkey, you got to give it to the Turks. There's one thing that they'll always have on their mind. They already had investments in Afghanistan construction. They'll be looking to see what they can do. I'm sure, European money or other monies flowing in, and if there's a building to be built, they'll probably be the ones building it. So now, the concern, of course, for Turkey and anybody else that is coming to help the Taliban is, how are they conducting themselves when it comes to issues of women's rights, girls going to school, and just day-to-day activities on the way they're treating captives, prisoners, the other side. If they are still fighting, what rules of engagement? Are we going to witness brutal scenes that we had before? We have a charm offensive by the Taliban that's taking place right now, and this is something that can't be jettisoned as soon as they feel that they can. This has to actually become policy if they're going to have people like Turkey and Pakistan and others be serious. And so I guess on the other side, if countries like Turkey and others, don't step up, then you've pretty much guaranteed that old style Taliban is likely to come back because they're going to panic because they can't deliver services, they can't pay people, and so it gets brutal and ugly. So it's tough though for us, because for all intents and purposes, we lost that war. Now, and that's fine for us to say that and wring our hands over that, but let's face it, we didn't really lose that war. People tell me that Afghanistan is the graveyard of empires, and that's just not true. Afghanistan is the graveyard of Afghans. They're the ones who have died as a result of our interventions, historical and contemporary. They're the ones who die, not us. We walk away. We leave people behind, people die, no question. But at the end of the day, we just get on with our lives. So this is where we're at right now. Those countries that are coming in are actually going to help us in the long run. They're going to take risks, but it's going to help make it. It's going to make things, I think, a little better at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, one of the points that's been raised is, are the Russians and the Chinese smirking? Well, yeah, okay, they probably are. But then they're also going to step back and say to themselves, uh-oh. I mean, does China want a completely ungoverned space? It doesn't have much of a border with Afghanistan, but it does have a small border, and there's ways through those mountains that actually go through third countries. So does it want an ungoverned space known as Afghanistan that has completely uncontrolled, unruly elements helping the Uyghurs against Chinese rule? Does it want, and does Russia want instability in Afghanistan? And what can it do about it? Because, as we like to say, Russia has history with Afghanistan. So they're going to have to tread lightly themselves. As people step back, I think you're right. They're going to have to figure out, how do we contribute to stability and progress in Afghanistan in the face of what, again, I strongly believe is a very heterogeneous group. The Taliban is made up of you have the Haqqani network in it. You have some of the old Mujahideen in it. You do have these people who have come of age in the last 20 years who do have different expectations. They are more plugged into the rest of the world. So there's going to be, and the question is going to be, what do you do to foster it? And, specifically, what can Turkey do to foster stability, which would, by the way, lead to economic opportunities, rather than, just washing their hands of Afghanistan? Which is, I think, the inclination among most Americans at this point. It's done, it's over, we're out of there. Don't even say the word Afghanistan to me anymore, which I don't think is the best.
Yeah, I think actually there's a great opportunity for Turkey here. Yes, I've mentioned Pakistan, but Pakistan is Pakistan and has a lot to contend with. But we know that Qatar has a lot of money, but they don't really have people. I mean, they obviously have people, but not many, and there's a lot of foreign folks there. So where is the actual energy and the workers and all of this and all of that going to come from? And Turkey would be sort of, I think, the other side of that coin, where you see Doha and Ankara working together, utilizing their best strengths to bring some stability to Afghanistan. Of course, it's in Turkey's national interests. We've already spoken about the potential for refugees flowing in, but also wider instability. We know, for example, that there are electrical and natural gas projects that are either ongoing or envisioned to go through parts of Afghanistan. This benefits the whole region. If the whole region begins to pick up economically, this benefits Turkey as well, because of course they have such a close relationship with the countries in the region. So the fact that, somebody has, let's say for the moment, won in Afghanistan, although we're always concerned about a civil war or a Game of Thrones like scenario happening.
Right.
But if Turkey is able to assist the government there, maintain stability, then that will aid Turkey. So I could see, if you were in Ankara, you're okay. Look, it's tough economically right now, and I know the government's under pressure as they look to 2023. But if you are sitting in Ankara, you'll be saying to yourself, "Hey, we're on a roll. We stopped General Haftar in Libya, and now we'll have elections. We'll see how that goes, but we intervened. We're big in Syria. we're moved in. We're protecting our interests. We did okay, and then you've got Azerbaijan, another win, and now things have changed dramatically in Afghanistan, but we're actually holding a few pretty important cards in the deck compared to many, many others. And I also think international NGOs would say, this is great if somebody can actually guarantee some level of security, because
Sure.
we want to, we know that there's going to be a humanitarian issues there. The UN has said so.
Yeah.
So the NGOs, of course, will be saying to countries like Turkey and Qatar, if you can go in and stabilize the situation, regardless of what political turn the Taliban take for the moment, this would be a win-win. I mean, a win for you, win for us, and so. I would think, yeah, I would think, of course, Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Turkey, they would be doing all they can to figure out what to do next.
Oh, yeah.
They have to look after their own people. They have to protect their own people, of course, but they're not risk averse. That is one thing we know. Although Turkish forces are out and people are out, they're not risk averse. And so when the conditions present, I'm sure we're going to see them, Turkey back in there in a big way, I would think.
Yeah, I want to pass on to Turkey, NATO, U.S., Afghanistan, but I just want to throw in a couple of things. You mentioned that Turkey has the economic crisis right now, so that kind of gets in the way of them doing anything. But you also mentioned that Qatar has a lot of money, so you could see some sort of combination: Turkish personnel, expertise, and Qatari money helping the Afghans to set up a functioning government, a functioning electric grid, delivery of services, etc. So yeah, I mean, it's we'll see. I mean, I think there are, as I would say, two sides of the same coin for Turkish opportunities. One, they could be of real service to others if they could keep the Taliban on track, and two, they could be of real service to themselves if they could get the Taliban on track. So. But let's talk a little bit about, this is not about what happened, but how it happened and the impact of how it happened on Turkish perceptions about the relationship of Turkey with NATO, with the US, and how the whole thing rolled out in the last 2 weeks, but also the fact that the US essentially made a unilateral decision about when and how it was going to withdraw, which of course drove what everybody else in NATO who was there, the 7,100 NATO personnel who were there, when they were going to leave and how they were going to leave. So if you could talk a little bit about that and what you think that the implications of that might be.
Okay, let's try this. First of all, I think a lot of people forget that Turkey was playing a big role in Afghanistan. It lost soldiers there. We know about the helicopter crash and the car crash that took away the commander of their forces in 2009, and one soldier was killed in 2015. We know that they were there. They had about 500 troops, but they were also very careful not to engage in combat operations and keep themselves apart from that. This may help going forward if there are negotiations with the Taliban about some renewed Turkish military presence there. We'll have to see. But Turkey, like everybody else, including Canada, was sort of left out. We feel left out of the process. That's at least what I'm hearing from former Canadian military commanders who were there on the ground. I think one of the tough things for us is that Canada withdrew its military forces from Afghanistan in 2014. That's 7 years ago. We did not have any military presence there after that, except for the military attachés and some others at the embassy, but we weren't involved with the Afghan National Army or police after that fact. Well, that made it really difficult for us when decisions were being made in NATO around the table as to whether to stick with our NATO forces in Afghanistan, because obviously Canada couldn't bang on the table and say we must remain there with our military forces when we had taken ours out years before. So that cause issues for us. But I think in general, the Allies were left with holding the bag sometimes. We know there was a degree of cooperation in the end, because simply you have to. If you've got all these military forces congregating at the airport in Kabul, somebody has to talk to somebody else. But I get the sense that it was very ad hoc. I get the sense that many, many people are unhappy with what happened as things unfolded there. And it's easy to point the finger at the United States, of course, because they're the ones you point the finger at usually when these sorts of things happen. But it's beginning to get a little old now and stale, but nobody, as we've heard time and time again, we didn't expect the Afghan military forces to fold so quickly. And even if you had a planner or someone around the table telling you that it's all going to fall apart, even if you had then decided, well, okay, I'm going to listen to that person and pre-position forces now, somebody would have caught wind that you were doing that, and the Afghans would have, and that would have actually led then things to speed up on the ground, and you would never have got ahead of this thing. I don't think there was actually any opportunity to really get ahead of what was going to happen, especially after, of course, the United States and the Taliban were negotiating with one another, and it was beginning to undermine the government and so forth. So there was no getting ahead of this at the end of the day, and it just had to be the way it was. I think at the end of the day, we will look back and say, wow, phew, we got away with that. All of these people left, including sadly, the best and the brightest of the Afghan people, the ones that we were actually encouraging and training and putting into position. They're all going to be now living in Canada or the United States or Sweden, or showing up on the Turkish border. So the best and the brightest are leaving. That's another story. But I think we'll probably look back and say, how did we get away with it with so few casualties? Sadly, the 13 American soldiers who lost their lives. I mean, it's the worst thing, the least thing you'd ever want to see. But we actually got away with this, and we'll dissect it for sure. But at the end of the day, we're out of there. And now it's up to the Afghans to figure out what they're going to do. Now, the worst thing, of course, is to end up with an Iraq-type scenario where you find yourself having to go back. And there are commentators that, will cleverly say at the end of the article, don't put your rifle away because you'll be back on a plane in a short while. Ideally, the countries that are stepping in right now, and how brave of the Qataris, and I'm going to tell you, full disclosure, I'm a member of the Canadian Qatari Friendship Society and visited there in 2018 and 2019. So full disclosure, but how brave to actually load up on that airplane and fly in and try to start putting things back together.
Yeah. One of my concerns about the reaction, again, not to what took place, but how it took place. A number of commentators have noted that even if the NATO partners, apart from the US, had wanted to stay, it wasn't only the US, it was the US decision to leave, but it was also the fact that the partners, the NATO allies minus the US, could not have sustained an operation to control the airport in order to extend the departure date and the evacuation date and all that. Accepting that for the moment as a correct premise. Mm-hmm. What does that say to Turkey about its plans moving forward, about developing its defense industry and developing its growing export of arms, marketing? I mean, is this? Do you look at that and say, well, we're just a sideshow in this organization. Why don't we start thinking about going a little more independent? That's, of course, I think, fraught with all sorts of perils. But
yeah, I don't think anyway. I mean, I think NATO, of course, is still very important for Turkey, and And I know that in NATO, they always say Turkey's the greatest thing and so strategically important to us. And you know what? It is true. I mean, now is a perfect case where NATO could actually be encouraging Turkey to take a larger role to create stability in the region. Why not? You play the cards you're given.
Right.
And Turkey could take advantage of this as well. It's not all about public relations, etc. I mean, these are, at the end of the day, we're talking about real people, real Afghans.
Yeah.
You know, they need help. So it's the right thing to do. So I would expect that there's a lot of behind the scenes on this. It's still early days, but
yeah,
people would encourage those that are able to go and help. You know, Azerbaijan has worked with Turkey in Afghanistan, so there's you know, opportunities there as well. So these are partners, and you have to treat them that way. I always wondered why the Afghan armed forces was not buying as many of the Bayraktar TB2 drones that they possibly could, because it's an incredible force enabler. And I'm not a salesman for the Bayraktar drone, but I told others about the drones and what they can do for militaries who are facing like counterinsurgency type work. But Turkey, obviously, the Taliban are awash in American equipment. Not that they can keep it running for that long, because
right.
You know, we forget that a big part of the players in there were contractors who were helping out. But there will always be opportunities. People will always look for opportunities. But I wouldn't think weapon sales would be on the minds of the Turkish government. I think they have much more. And I'm not being paid by the Turkish government to say this either, but they would have much more important capabilities to bring to the table. And I'm thinking about their technical expertise, whether it's running communications equipment, the airport, other airports, getting the road systems back up and the traffic lights working in Kabul, such as they are. I mean, these are the things that Turkey brings to the table, having worked in the region for decades and decades and decades, and obviously sharing religious ties, which we tend to downplay, but would be important here too.
Well, I mean, you're talking to someone who was well known in the U.S. Foreign Service of being always concerned about religious ties. And how the United States had for far too long ignored the interplay of religion and politics and other cultural issues in politics, and that you know, if the Afghans were an overwhelmingly Shia population, or they were some sort of kind of fringe Sunni sect, the openings for the Turks would be at the very least narrower. And that's simply a fact. And the fact that they are co-religionists by and large, really does in some ways, it kind of smooths over the ability of to get in there. And you know,
I'm not under any illusions, Ed, sorry to jump in, but I just wanted to say this too, but I'm not under any illusions that the Taliban are going to uphold human rights to the level we would expect, or women's rights. We will have to fight for every inch of ground when it comes to women's rights and girls going to school. And if they do pivot on this for some reason, I'd be surprised, of course.
No, I mean, I think, and if you also think about the 38 million, I think is the official UN number of Afghans in Afghanistan, the 38 million Afghans in Afghanistan, you know, they're holding their breath. They're waiting to see what's going on, particularly the urban ones. And so if the Taliban is interested in winning the hearts and minds of people, they might go a little slowly on the removal of all those rights for women and schooling for girls. But at the same time, the population is going to be really interested in things like, do we have enough food? Is there clean drinking water? Is there petrol for the cars? Is there electricity? Is there fuel for whatever form of heating when it gets cold? Those are the day-to-day issues that every country in the world, the citizenry really cares about a lot more than we sometimes understand. I mean, when you're in North America, it's pretty easy to forget that many places around the world, it's rather a struggle to make sure there's enough food for the coming week. We don't have that problem in North America.
No, I mean, many rolling blackouts are the order of the day in many, many countries that we would consider advanced. And you're absolutely right. I mean, no one is going to school if there are no teachers, no salaries, no electricity, and no building. We're kind of back to square one. Sadly though, this is Afghanistan. Every time the Soviets would put up a school, the Mujahideen would blow it up, and of course funded by, we know
us.
Who. So they've lived through this cycle of up and down and up and down. And so now we're into, as I said to some other people I was talking to about this, and they're so concerned about the future as they should be. I said, but we're reading a big book right now, and we've just got to the end of one chapter, and we're on it's a cliffhanger, and we now need to turn the page and figure out how the rest of the story will unfold.
Right.
So, but there are people, I mean, clinging to airplanes, desperate to get out. Many Afghans were desperate to get out before the Taliban showed up in Kabul. We know this because if you look at, despite all of our work there, if you look at any index, Human Rights Watch, Transparency International, Afghanistan is at the very, very bottom of all of these lists, despite all the work we did. So people were willing to get out and do it any way they could, and of course this Taliban situation made it even more so the case. This is another chapter.
Yeah.
Will the future of Afghanistan be stable, or will it devolve into this Game of Thrones situation or scenario? We don't know.
Yeah.
But if there's any light at the end of the tunnel, it was that aircraft landing today with technicians on board to try to, the first sort of arguably positive thing that we've seen in all of this mess. Was somebody going back in to say, let's try to fix things.
Let's try to get things up and running.
Yeah.
Chris, thanks very much. That's about it. We're running out of time. I want to thank you again. I hope our listeners and viewers enjoy this. And I think everybody realizes, this is chapter 1 in a long book. So we'll be back for more chapters. All right. Take care.
Thank you.
You can follow Ahval News Online podcast series through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, and Spreaker. All you need to know about Turkey is here for your ears, mind, and attention. Thank you for listening to our podcast.